In our next session, we're digging deeper into what's possible with generative AI. Ethan is going to stay on, this time joined by Insight Partners Managing Director Lonne Jaffe, who will discuss AI's jagged frontier, with each improvement reshaping the strategy and tools in business. As your AI MC, I'm very excited to tune in for this.
I want to dig into a couple of topics around defensibility and moats and how sources of economic power are shifting in the market, because I think that's a very interesting topic. Obviously, it has a big impact for us from an investment perspective, but I think a lot of folks are thinking about it because existing incumbents and startups are trading power balances like a pendulum. Maybe I wanted to start with you have an interesting concept around the bitter lesson for business. And so maybe you could start with just explaining the bitter lesson in general and then how it applies in a business context.
Sure, and if you follow Twitter online, there's lots of debate over the bitter lesson, but I'm going to give you what I think the actual bitter lesson is, and ignoring the person who created it, who keeps reinterpreting. But so my favorite example of bitter lesson is chess computers, right? The bitter lesson is an idea from AI research, from machine learning research. And if you think about how chess computers worked, the way that you'd build a chess computer throughout most of history that we were building chess computers was you'd hire a grandmaster. You'd put every move and gambit into these systems you could. And that's, in fact, how Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov. There were chess masters who trained the models, and then it did lots of parallel processing and computing. But in the end, it was really a mix of lots of parallel processing, but this actual expertise. And then in 2018, Google released AlphaZero, which was a chess model that didn't know chess. Instead, it played against itself using a chess computer that would actually enforce the rules and learned what the rules were and played against itself until it could beat a grandmaster. And that's the bitter lesson in a nutshell. Your beautiful, specific, handcrafted solution to a problem is going to be destroyed at some point by the idea that you can build a general-purpose machine learning tool, throw compute at it, and it will figure out how to solve the problem. And to me, there was a revelatory moment. I talk to OpenAI on a fairly regular basis, all the labs on a regular basis. I don't take money from any of them, but I talk to them. And they asked us our opinion, my wife and I, our opinion about the new ChatGPT agent that they had released. And we said, well, one of the problems compared to Manus or the agents we've been building is there's no to-do list. The AI doesn't tell you I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really hard to diagnose problems and correct it. And they said, well, we can't give you a to-do list. The model is directly reinforcement learning trained on what good PowerPoint and Excel looks like. It just does good PowerPoint and Excel. We have no idea how or why, and we can't do anything about it. And that was a moment for me where I'm like, wow, okay, if the output is what matters in your business, you're in trouble of being bitter lessoned, right? You might learn the bitter lesson because we can train the AI on outputs, and then the process doesn't matter. If the process matters, if the conversations matter, the going back and forth, the writing of the report is the more important part than the report itself, then there's hope. So moats come from some sort of process that makes a difference. If it's about an output, a report, a customer interaction, I think there's danger that general learning comes for you. And you can move that up a level to software in general. When will the labs come for you? If you're doing an output, the labs can come for you. If you're part of a process that there's human interaction and interaction between multiple parts of an organization together, there's a moat, there's hope.
Yeah, I think when ChatGPT first came out, a lot of people had an intuition that this might be one of those platform shifts that benefited incumbents, partially because they didn't have to do the AI part themselves. It was being handed to them like electricity over the internet. So if you were an existing, say, software player, you could just wire it into your product, and you would have like a co-pilot of some kind that would use your product the way people do, and you could have all sorts of incremental GenAI features, and the startups would struggle. Because one of the things we've been noticing empirically, this is not a prediction, it's more just like an observation, is that a lot of those early products were just really not that good. And meanwhile, the frontier labs have been shipping enormous amounts of capability, and like the coding agents have the ability to, like Neo from the Matrix, like upload skills into themselves to do things using a lot of packaged software. Curious to get your thoughts on sort of like startups versus incumbents and how because you're talking to a lot of like real world companies who are like wrestling with this kind of topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting problem right now. So, I mean, I sort of think about these phases of development, which is phase 0, which every company is still haunted by, which was in early 2023, you assembled your AI ethics committee and you set up a bunch of rules, and now that committee is still in charge of a lot of AI adoption in your company. They don't understand how AI works. They're still chasing imaginary privacy concerns that don't exist anymore. And I've talked to large organizations that have hundreds of use cases pending in front of those. So then you started a process where you probably got Copilot and you built a talk to your document solution that works moderately well but wasn't transformative. And now people are moving on to getting direct access to chatbots and tools directly, and they're trying to decide build and buy and vendor decisions. Part of why people go to vendors is organizational inertia. It's really hard to think about how do we make an organization work around AI stuff. We have the 770 cases pending in front of our committee that we need to sort through. So vendors are an easy decision. But I do see when I talk to companies this kind of bubbling up idea of like, we can do this ourselves. But again, the locus starts to shift from this is an IT software problem to this is an organizational design and execution problem that we might need help with. And so I think that you're seeing a lot of interest in vendors, but when I talk to companies, they're exhausted. They're like, we spent 900 vendors, and as they start to get savvy about it, they're basically just giving us someone else's model. And that doesn't mean they're just a wrapper, but they're giving us do we want to actually have this capability? This capability we need in-house. So I think you're going to see a move from this sort of like we need a vendor to help us to a level of sophistication we're starting to see that's not just growing in IT, often not in IT at all, but from other parts of the organization that are, especially the executive level. Increasingly, I'm seeing CEOs start to directly involve themselves in the kinds of decision-making that we're seeing around AI.
Yeah, another sort of moat that incumbents have traditionally enjoyed is switching costs, right? Like there's a huge portion of the software industry that has products that if you asked, 100 of their customers, do you like this product? 100 of them would say no, right? But they rely on the fact that it's hard to move off of that product. And I wonder if you're hearing early examples or seeing early examples at customers of people starting to either anticipate the erosion of switching costs or even see them in the real world.
Yeah, that is a very common thread. The CTOs I talk to have all gotten that message. They're not necessarily sure how they're going to get there or how soon, but I've been talking to people at Fortune 50 companies at the C-level who've been like, we're not going to sign another 5-year contract. We're going to make sure that we really have our data and it's not sort of our data that we have capabilities for. I'm seeing, and we were talking about this before, projects where there's large-scale conversion efforts where we're playing out the weight equation. The models aren't quite good enough yet, but they will be good enough to take data out. I'm seeing people experiment and actual working products now where they use legacy systems as databases, and an AI agent does searches across the legacy systems using the human interfaces that were built for it, and actually combines data together with other data sources. So I think that there is a lot of interest in getting rid of the most hated lock-in that they have, and hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, and a lot of incentive to solve that problem. They don't necessarily have the talent to do it yet, but they're betting on that curve, and I think you're going to see that come up often. I think organizations and software companies that are transparent about how they're helping organizations solve problems versus it's AI magic, that's going to wear thin very, very quickly.
There's a concept that's getting a lot of attention, at least from investors, around this sort of services as a software thesis. And just to sort of frame it, you have the models themselves, which I think there was an early sense that the models, the frontier labs were just going to cook models in the oven, and then take models out of the oven and make them available to the world, and then people would build applications and infrastructure around them. But in practice, they seem to be doing a lot more. They're shipping a lot of infrastructure themselves. I think they want to have reinforcement learning harnesses out in the world, and so they're actually, and just the raw model capabilities can do a lot of application things, like answer legal questions, or to your point, medical questions and things like that. So there's them, and then there's just keeping with law, there's the existing legal software vendors who are adding in applications like copilots and things like that. Then there's GenAI native legal companies. And then there's this other approach what you're starting to see is well, why don't we just be a law firm? We'll hire a bunch of lawyers and we'll hire former DeepMind or OpenAI or Anthropic researchers and do the GenAI native law firm product and show up in as a law firm shaped product. Curious to hear, obviously this varies a little bit from sector to subsector, but how you see that whole phenomenon playing out.
So there's one theme to pull out first, which is I just don't think in the near term there is not really a place for competing with the LLM vendors and making LLMs, right? And like if you're fine-tuning, you're now basically betting, hoping that the Chinese market continues to produce really good open weights models, or maybe OpenAI deigns to provide another one at some point. But I think we already saw with Qwen Max that there's a move away even from the Chinese model makers of having everything be open. So part of the concern is, starting native in terms of like, we're going to train our own model or fine-tune our own model. I don't know. Like I don't know whether you have a long-term advantage against the model makers there, right? And we've seen that happen in different spaces. And then the other thing is just a bet against the organizational inertia. It's a bet that organizations will not be able to get their act together, and that's a reasonable bet, right? Like, but I do think organizations have some ability to move differently or think about process differently with AI that might let them overcome this inertia. They have the customers, so I think you need to be more than like, big law firms are slow and stupid, because a lot of vendors are trusting, a lot of their clients are trusting them to make decisions about AI use, and they're pressuring them, by the way. It's gone, when you talk to law firms, they've gone from saying, their contracts say they may not use AI, to being pressed that they have to cut costs because they're using AI. And at some point, the law firms are going to have to move from the billable hour moment, and someone's going to break first. So I think it's a little, I think there's real value in this space, but I think the question is, can you really compete with given that there's an acceleration happening everywhere, you're making a bet that the law firms aren't going to crack this first. It's a completely reasonable bet. I just don't know whether it's, like, there's as much advantage to bring to the table as people think.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we were talking about is, you don't even have to tell people about what the models are going to do in the future. All you have to do is tell them about what they can do in the present. And to them, it's the future, because people are actually surprisingly not aware of even the things that came out a couple of months ago, let alone the eye-watering pace of announcements that we saw over the last couple of weeks, with everything from Sora 2 to Claude 4.5 Sonnet to the OpenAI announcements at Dev Day yesterday. And I guess it might be useful to just talk about some of the things, the latest things that you're seeing come unlocked, right? That people are often like not realizing exist today, but are, have a lot of potential energy, especially in a business context.
And the biggest deal is like, agents turn out to be real, right? They weren't real for a very long time, and now they're real and absolutely usable. And no one's noticed yet. So there's a few things that have made that happen. One is we are kind of wrong about what we thought the problems with agents were going to be. So we thought the issue would be that since there's a hallucination rate and error rates associated with AI agents, the longer an AI runs, the more hallucinations creep in and the more it breaks. So you couldn't do that, AI for a long time. It turns out that was wrong. It turns out that larger models are self-correcting enough that it turns out not to be a big problem. And small increases in accuracy, and we've been seeing those start to happen. A 1% increase in accuracy of models can increase the amount of steps they can do by 2 to 3 times. And there's all these untried techniques yet of having models check each other and check against actual data. So like, if you haven't read the GDP eval paper from OpenAI, it is an interesting paper. They basically hired a bunch of experts with 14 years of average experience to build challenges for the AI that took 4 to 8 hours on average to do. And then they had other experts also trying to compete, and they had a third set of experts evaluate the outcomes. And what they found was we're very close to 50-50 preference between AI and human. In some fields like software, the AI beats the human most of the time in outside expert views. And it took experts an hour to go through the results. Well, it took and experts 4 to 8 hours to create the content that AI typically took 5 or 10 minutes to build. And so if you really want to right now, the pieces are here to generate economically valuable results with the agentic systems built into the UXs for the chatbots right now, at least for OpenAI's models and for Anthropic's models, I'm sure soon Google's. So like, that is a very big deal, because we've been talking about it as if this is a complicated thing. I've been building agentic tools for 2 years since OpenAI came out. We've been doing things for education, and like, half of that just got swept away, and the rest of it is going to get swept away soon. So I think that, like, again, if your bet is the rest of the world's not going to know for long enough, and there's room for agent builders, maybe, but also the models, you just ask them to do something nicely, and they do it. And I think that people don't quite realize good PowerPoint, good Excel, like even Microsoft has moved from like a Copilot model to agents doing stuff with their new models. And I think, to me, that shift has been a big one, like, and very quick, and a threshold kind of approach.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people have almost like they want there to be a massive slowdown in model improvement capability. And like this is, I think, where you see things like the 95% of projects fail, buzz in the media, but you also see it with the models are going to hit a wall and they're going to all of a sudden stop getting better. And it's an interesting phenomenon. You talk about the jagged frontier of model capabilities, where there's like surprising things they can do and then surprising things that they can't do, and you kind of need to find that. It almost feels like there's been a bit of a jagged frontier of like organizational capability too. I've been noticing there are some organizations. I mean, we talk to prospects all the time. We're talking to 20,000 prospects every year, and you'll talk to even AI companies, like pre-GenAI AI companies that built convolutional neural networks for computer vision, and they'll say something like, "Yeah, and you ask, have you tried your models? Like you have your model that can tell you like radiology understanding or something. Have you tried the new computer vision capabilities?" And be like, "Yeah, we did try it. It's not as good as this thing that we built over the last 10 years, and therefore will never be as good."
I mean, I think there's huge amounts of anxiety, and it's well-founded. Like, my book starts with the idea that you have to have like an existential crisis. I absolutely believe that's true. Like, I've taught enough people about AI use. Like, I have seen senior people in organizations push away their computer partway through a training thing and say, "It doesn't work," and walk away, right? Like, that's not a normal reaction. Like, it is uncomfortable to use. We're not used to thinking about pace of change. The models, you can make the models screw up if you want them to. Like, there's a whole subgenre of like, look, it can't, like, there's definitely things it can't do. The jagged frontier is much less meaningful than it used to be, right? Like, this is part of the problem. Like, I used to be able to demonstrate the jagged frontier here by saying, count the number of words in the sentence. The models all do that now. Like, I don't have good examples for you now that are like, they're not like look, when it did the statistical analysis, it actually didn't cluster standard errors properly. Like, stuff nobody cares about and you could debate about is where the jagged frontier is starting to be. So I do worry, and especially when I talk to software companies, that they're comforted by the inertia of other people, which is like, well, they're not noticing the change, and we did check in 6 weeks ago, and it's not good. And of course, Codex and Claude Code are getting really good, but like they're not really great yet. And there was that one study I saw that I was repeating on LinkedIn. I can't believe how much LinkedIn rumors beat everything else, right? That 95% of projects fail was based on an interview done by 50 people. It became an MIT study because one guy who cared about agents interviewed people at a conference and decided that 95% of projects failed. And like, I hear it everywhere, right? Like, it is amazing, the psychological resistance, and understandable too. But I worry that organizations I talk to and software vendors are not always clear-eyed about what this actually means.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some brass tacks tactics for companies that are, maybe their CEO sent out a note that says, GenAI is really important, everybody has to use it, and everybody's like, that's great, but like, what do we actually do, right? And you brought up a bunch of really interesting sources of inertia, like the phenomenon of, my data is so important, so I can't actually put it in the system. You see that with, software companies do that with programming. You see it with, anyone with compliance requirements. You also see the phenomenon of like, people don't want to share what they're using. I'm sure you've seen some interesting like tactics around how do you incentivize people to share. Like, if you do the distributed computing of like having people who are really good at GenAI use it in their jobs, and then you want to harvest those best practices and like harden them with the lab teams, like any sort of strategies or tactics you've seen people use.
So this is where Leadership Lab crowd really comes in. So first of all, this is a leadership problem. There's like, people want a vision of the future. If your vision of the future is you will use AI to be 10% more productive, nobody actually cares about that, and they're threatened, right? But like, people are not inspired by vague promises. My colleague Drew Carton has a whole bunch of studies showing that CEOs that give vague information, no one is inspired by, or like numbers to hit. So you need a vision of what does this company look like in the future, which requires you to do some work to actually think about that. Then you need to think about incentive systems. I've seen organizations do all sorts of incentives. I've seen companies where there's another software company where rather brutally gave everyone GPT-4 access early on and then fired everyone who didn't use it within the first month. But I've also seen companies where you give $10,000 prizes at the end of every week to whoever automates their job the most. I have seen the CEOs of incredibly large organizations at every meeting say, what have you used AI to help me with in the meeting? I've seen managers pull out their computers and say, we're going to take a 5-minute AI break in the middle of this conversation, and everyone talks to the AI for 5 minutes, and then we continue the conversation in a more useful way. I've seen people say whenever you want to put a job recruitment statement out, you can definitely hire that person, but the team has to spend 2 hours trying to do that job with AI first, and then rewrite the job proposal for that. Same thing with other cost proposals. There's lots of motivational techniques. It's not like we've changed the way humans get motivated to do stuff, but it requires leaders to take a position and a stand and actually push for something. And then the lab fills this important role because you will, every company then pushes out, whatever it is, Copilot or, or something to their organization, and they'll find that 20% of their users actually use it. Another 30% are secretly using their own tools, and another 50% are waiting for instructions. Of the 20% using it, though, 2% of your users are going to be the best users on the planet. Like, that's your lab. Is the people, you already know who they are in your company because they're the people desperately trying to get you to use AI that you've been ignoring, right? Those people fill up the lab, and they are turning around ideas right away. So you have quick wins and use cases that happen immediately.
Yeah, no, I've seen some examples of that sort of deputize, and it can be relatively junior people in the organization in this lab form factor to harden things. And I mean, the alternative, there's cautionary situations with the tops-down approach too, where you'll see, well, we're going to be early to AI, and we're going to build some sort of like, chatbot interface ourselves, or fine-tune our own models, and that can sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think flexibility is the key, right? So there are the two kinds. I mean, in some ways, the worst case was you got trapped by something that kind of worked, right? So you built your talk to your documents model, and people kind of love it, and now you're spending all your time keeping a Llama 2 installation up and running when you could just ask ChatGPT with an interface connection. So like, there's a nimbleness required that is hard for people to do. I think getting on the horse and staying on it's probably a good idea, but again, leadership makes brutal decisions. Like, we don't need this system anymore. It was great a year ago. We invested in it. We're investing to learn to some extent. By the way, I mean, one of the ways I've been hearing people talk about vendors now, just for all of you, is like renting capability while we learn it ourselves. So they're not from a partnership, but like, how do we get on a speed that's changing? Because again, it's not just capabilities, it's cost. Right? If I can get the same capabilities, I mean, I'm absolutely convinced GPT-5 is good enough to transform almost every industry, right, in the next 10 years. There's no way that the models aren't good enough to do this with the kind of setup you have. People just haven't realized it yet. So how do you start guiding people along a world that's changing? That's a hard problem.
Yeah, and companies do really want to reinvent themselves, and although some of them, you can imagine a lot of their existing product or their whole, all of the things that previously were moats are just not useful anymore, sort of Tower Records style, or Blockbuster, or car service dispatch company in London when Uber shows up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the general thing here is like, being clear-eyed is the hardest part. So the number one thing I would say is like, the difference I see in organizations that have a chance of succeeding and failing is having senior leadership that's willing to eat risk. Right? This is why founders end up winning, is they'll bet the farm again, right? One way or another. And there are some CEOs of established companies. I talk a lot to people at JP Chase. I think Jamie Dimon buying in, and then Mary Erdos, who heads a private bank, buying in, like, that has given permission and air cover for really interesting things to happen. So when the C-level buys in, suddenly things start to change and happen in an organization. But without that, I think there's just going to be a comfortable decline for a lot of organizations as they move forward. But I don't think it's just old companies. Like, this is a new enough thing, and the capability gains that actually are economically valuable are so recent that I really worry about startups. I mean, I'm a startup software person myself, right, who's launched startup companies. Like, I worry that we don't get it either, that this is like, the change is happening very quickly, and we need to be adjusting as well. That might mean being, by the way, much more ambitious about what your product can do than before.
This was great. Thank you for both your talk and the fireside chat, and everyone else, have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you, guys.